In September 1862, a heated debate erupted in the Parliament of Berlin, the capital of the Kingdom of Prussia. A corpulent middle-aged man, newly appointed as the prime minister, stood at the podium delivering a fervent speech. With a resolute gaze and clenched fists waving in the air, he spoke passionately, although the assembly showed little interest in his message. He proclaimed that Prussia's status within Germany was determined not by the currents of liberalism but by Prussian strength. He argued that Prussia must develop its military power and await an opportunity to initiate a war, stating this as the optimal path for Prussia's rise. As he concluded his remarks, boos resonated from the floor. The 19th-century Prussian state was largely under the informal control of the Liberal Party, which had recently denied a request from the Prussian king to allocate funds for military enhancement, viewed as a nonsensical effort by others, especially when even the king could not expand the military. The man's call was met with derision. Amidst the jeers, he raised his voice louder than the disapproving murmurs, denouncing the territorial decisions made at the Congress of Vienna following Napoleon's defeat as grave mistakes detrimental to the health and well-being of Prussia's citizens. Before the new prime minister could finish, a louder uproar broke out among the attendees. Some shouted for him to be quiet, accusing him of ignorance about Prussia, while others dismissed his speech as nonsense and called for his resignation. Amidst the chaos, he passionately declared a statement that would echo through the ages, startling Prussia and altering the landscape of Europe. He contended that major issues could not be resolved by parliamentary debate or majority vote, asserting that iron and blood were the only means to change the world, with truth only existing within the range of cannon fire. The year 1815 marked a significant turning point for the Kingdom of Prussia. After Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo, he retreated from the historical stage, allowing Prussia to recover territories lost during the wars through the Congress of Vienna. At this Congress, the disintegrated Holy Roman Empire was re-established as the German Confederation, a loose assembly of over 30 small states and 4 free cities, far less cohesive than its predecessor. Remarkably, 1815 was also the year Otto von Bismarck was born, destined to become the Iron Chancellor and lead Germany into the era of the German Empire. His birth coincided with the creation of the German Confederation, as if preordained by fate. Born into a Junker estate-owning family, his father was a traditional noble, descended from a line of military servicemen rewarded with land that their descendants lived off. In stark contrast, Bismarck's mother hailed from an emerging middle-class family, deeply influenced by Enlightenment ideals, ambitious and assertive in her individualism and freedom. Unlike her husband, she was socially active and ambitious, often hosting gatherings and preferring not to have her husband around, which sometimes meant sending him out of the room. Otto von Bismarck, born into such a family, was subject to his father's old-fashioned aristocratic education, which instilled in him a belief that he was superior to most. At the same time, he faced rebukes from his mother, a staunch liberal, who reminded him that he was not inherently great and that his family's prestige was not his own merit. This dynamic was akin to receiving a sweet date from his father only for his mother to immediately whip him in punishment. Once, when Bismarck proudly showed his friends portraits of his ancestors, boasting of their great deeds, his mother confiscated the portraits and scolded him, admonishing him not to boast about his lineage, which deeply wounded his young aristocratic pride and embarrassed him in front of his friends. Trapped between liberal ideologies and traditional aristocratic teachings, Bismarck became increasingly irritable and sensitive, particularly resenting his mother, who consistently belittled his noble status and the middle-class liberalism she represented. His discontent peaked when she enrolled him in a middle-class school in Berlin, where he was the only noble. In school, his peers relentlessly mocked and belittled him, bordering on bullying. Influenced by Enlightenment ideas, both teachers and students continuously criticized this isolated noble, contributing to a gradual erosion of his youthful innocence and purity. Eventually, unable to tolerate this any longer, Bismarck began to show his fangs. If classmates insulted his noble status, he responded with a punch. Even teachers who expressed displeasure faced his fierce gaze and biting retorts. This aggressive behavior earned him poor remarks from teachers, noting his domineering nature and lack of respect. Despite his tough exterior, Bismarck had his tender moments. He sometimes cried from bullying, eagerly counting down to weekends when he could escape to his home. Yet, his mother's neglect continued. She would write telling him she was going to the seaside to escape the summer heat and that he should stay at school, which infuriated him deeply. Gradually, Bismarck grew increasingly independent and skeptical of others, challenging rules and authority. By the age of 15, he had become a notorious youth, flirting with women and boldly defying divine authority. At 16, he was audaciously embracing women with one arm while cursing the heavens with the other, as if he stood above all, both earthly and divine. It's important to understand that Prussia at the time was a religious society, where not only the clergy but even the less educated peasants retained some degree of Protestant faith. Against this backdrop of authoritative belief, 16-year-old Bismarck not only refrained from praying but actively cursed God daily. He arrogantly proclaimed that his will was independent and unrelated to God. At such a young age, Bismarck dared to compare himself with God, claiming he could influence God's arrogance and insolence. His defiant spirit, cultivated during a painful childhood, did not diminish even after he was admitted to the University of Göttingen. During his youth, Bismarck was notably slim and tall, with a face full of acne and fiery red, unkempt hair. Among well-dressed university students, he was the least interested in his appearance, often wearing ragged clothes despite his noble status, and he grew a distinctive goatee early on. Notably, he always carried a long saber at his waist, his tool for dealing with any disrespect. When Bismarck, looking disheveled and leading his dog, walked proudly through the campus, anyone who dared to laugh at him, whether they were upperclassmen or younger students, regardless of their family's status, even if they were a king's son or a prime minister's nephew, would find themselves challenged by his saber. At that time, disputes were settled not by mere fights, but by duels reminiscent of medieval European life-or-death struggles. Participants donned armor and wielded sharp sabers, aiming to stab each other. Any sign of fear or severe injury was considered a defeat. Losing a duel meant lifelong submission to the victor, a brutal custom indeed. Typically, few dared to engage in such duels, but Bismarck, during his 3 semesters at university, fought in 27 duels and won them all. This frequent dueling left him scarred, including a notable long scar from his ear to his nose, received during one of these combats. Far from being ashamed, Bismarck boasted about this scar, which almost became a badge of courage, even in his later years as Chancellor. Once, Bismarck intended to visit the University of Jena, and upon hearing of his planned visit, the faculty immediately convened a meeting to discuss how to prevent him from entering their campus. The decision to ban him was unanimous, nearly leading to a sign being placed at the university gates specifically barring Bismarck and his dog. This incident illustrates the extreme measures taken to avoid his disruptive presence, highlighting just how notorious his reputation had become. Perhaps understating it as merely lawless would be an understatement. During this period, the unruly Bismarck was forced to transfer from the University of Göttingen to the University of Berlin to study law. There, he met a fellow student named Marx. Yes, the very Karl Marx you were thinking of. Marx thought Bismarck was foolish, and Bismarck nearly beat him up, fortunately not to death. If he had, he might have unintentionally become a hero to the capitalist world. Bismarck continued his reckless lifestyle until he stepped into the professional world, where for the first time, he began to seriously consider his future. At that time, Bismarck could not have imagined that the future role of the Iron Chancellor was awaiting him. Though it's said in jest that the formation of the German Confederation and Bismarck's birth in the same year seemed to predestine him to lead Germany towards unification, realistically, no grand career is specifically preordained for anyone. Without shaping oneself like iron forged into a gear, one cannot hope to turn the wheels of an era. The young and still reckless Bismarck, given his disdain for military service due to his reluctance to take orders, would not have seen this future. To avoid conscription, he seriously began to study law, aiming to become a lawyer and thus exempt from military duty. This decision marked the beginning of his departure from his lawless ways, driven by his intense and determined character. Within less than a year, he passed his exams and became a lawyer. Previously, he might have been a defendant in court, but now he stood there as a lawyer. However, his arrogance persisted. He often defended his clients with autocratic zeal, even showing disdain for judges and witnesses. Once, after a judge issued what he considered an unfair verdict, Bismarck pointed at the judge and berated him, which nearly got him thrown out of the courtroom and the legal profession altogether. This incident profoundly shook him, leading him to realize that judges wield power. This epiphany prompted him to abandon his legal career for politics.